I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Sabrina Horn is my guest today. I am really excited for this because I just finished reading her book, Make It, Don't Fake It. Here it is, an actual physical book in my hand. Sabrina is one of the all-time greats in tech PR, ran her own firm, started it when she was 29 years old. I was not doing anything nearly that cool when I was 29 years old. And the book is all about authenticity. You can't fake it till you make it. You need to be authentic from the beginning. So many great stories, including embezzlement and breaking down, crying in the street, but also winning big major accounts, competing on a national and global scale. So, Sabrina, I am really grateful that we're having this conversation. Thank you for the time today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Eric. It's great to be here. Great to be on your podcast.
So tell me, because fake it till you make it is such a common phrase, and you get into all in the book there, but I start to think about people who are just starting out. It's literally like, I've never done this before, so I've got nothing to show to somebody. I don't know how I get my first client because I've never had a client. So it's a real chicken and egg thing. I think about this for any client service business that exists, right? So a PR agency, asset manager, a TV agent, a Hollywood agent, sports agent, anything where it's like, I want you to be my first client. How does anyone do that if they're not faking it?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it comes down to a couple of things. Of course, you've got to have a business plan, right? I mean, you have to, if you don't have a plan, you don't know where you're going. You have to write down what your goals are and how you're going to be different. And, like the way you would write a business plan for any business, you have to figure out what your risks are. And what I did, because at the age of 29, I knew how to do public relations for startups, but I didn't know how to run a company at all. And I mean, I probably managed an intern. I had like 4 years of job experience. So you have to kind of organize what the risks are that can cause fear and that can cause you to fake it. And by organizing your risk, you can disarm the fear and basically ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen? Right. And hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. And then somehow we can get into it as we talk, but somehow if you know those two ends of the spectrums, you can kind of straddle the middle and move forward with more confidence so that when you've thought it through, you don't have to fake it.
I think about, and not saying this is you, people who write books, they often write it, it's like a self-reflection of things that they did wrong. And you talk about mistakes that you've made and points where it was like, hey, this is just about the revenue and not about what people are doing. There were parts where it was you were drifting into faking it a little bit.
Yeah.
But do you think at the time when you were 29, when you were starting the company, in your head, did you think I am literally faking it? Or I am doing everything authentically? Like, is part of this your own catharsis of like, I admit that I would have done this very differently if I had to start over again?
No, I definitely vehemently don't think I faked it. Like I had nothing to lose. Like when you feel like you have nothing to lose, there's no pressure to be something that you're not. And I figured I had one shot and I would give it my best and I would be honest about what I couldn't do as a single proprietor at the time. And I was so afraid actually of faking it and of lying because then I would have to live up to, what I had said. And so I figured, I'm just gonna see what I can do and see if it lands me somewhere. So I started on that premise. It was later on when I realized I had a tiger by the tail that I
When
had
you had something to lose, when you had a bigger business, you have employees and revenues and a career.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. When you have something to lose and people are watching you and the spotlight's on you, the microscope is on you every day, that's when you are more apt to fake it and wing it or say things because you feel like you have to have all the answers when you actually don't.
I want to ask about social media because it didn't exist in 91. Obviously, different forms of media existed then and
Right.
still exist now, but there's so much faking it on social media. Everybody's LinkedIn is so polished. Everyone's Twitter is their manicured image, and TikTok, forget about it. Instagram, forget about it. There's so much
Yeah.
fakery, but we see it and still believe it subconsciously, whether we know it or not. We believe what we're seeing is true on some level. I need to be like them. Like for me, right? I go on LinkedIn and everyone looks like they're having a better life than me, a better career than me. They got the better job. They're the CEO. They're the managing director. They're running their own business, and I'm not. And that's just the LinkedIn version, right? And then there's all the other versions. What do you look like? What car do you have? How pretty is your spouse? All of this stuff. So how do you combat that now when individuals are faking it through social media? Companies are using social media to fake it. It's a cesspool out there. It's an avalanche.
Yeah, I mean, so like, I mean, that is the truth, right? You're absolutely right about what you're saying. I think, especially for young people like in their 20s who are just starting out, that is extremely intimidating and like is like instant, like, okay, I have to fake it. But so what do you do? So you have to ground yourself in a set of core values. And I wrote about this a lot in the book. Like you have to know who you are and what you stand for every day when you wake up and when your head hits the pillow at night. And that is as much what you won't tolerate and what you will not stand for. And it's living a life of commitment to those values. Because on some level, you also have to know that those pretty perfect little pictures are not really reality. I mean, anybody can doctor up their photos and make them look beautiful, or doctor up their resume. It's one of the most common ways that people actually fake it, is that they puff up their accomplishments. And there's no way to call BS on all that other than to just shoot your own straight arrow. And honesty is a really great strategy, great marketing strategy right now, because it's
Right now, like you say, honesty is a great strategy right now. You say it almost like it's a fad, right? Like, teal colors are in right now, and honesty is a good strategy right now, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, honesty and integrity, right, should never be uh, an option in a multiple choice question, right? It should just be how you operate. And the whole point of my message is that faking it may get you to point B or maybe even point C, but what happens is it catches up with you. And ultimately, lies beget lies, which we saw with Elizabeth Holmes and at Theranos, right? And the truth always comes out. It might take a week or a year or a couple years, but the truth always comes out. And when it does, you'll ruin your credibility and sabotage your success. So it's just not worth it. And while you're waiting to be exposed, right, you have all this anxiety, whether you realize it or not. Like, who wants to live that kind of life? It's just better to be honest and shoot a straight arrow.
Do you notice there's a correlation with people who are faking it, the lies that they're telling themselves in the world? Do you notice a correlation between that and the diseases they develop, the addictions that they form, the personal bad behavior that is around them? And sometimes I wonder, because again, I'm looking from afar, I wonder if I see this external problem, is there something happening on the inside that I don't know about, but this is signifying?
Yeah, I mean, look, it sort of starts to consume you, right? This is what I think you're saying. It consumes you and it eats away at you until you literally become the imposter, right? In the extreme cases. But we want to impress that person, and then we tell a lie, and so we have to live up to that lie. And so we buy products or we wear clothes or we say things that other people look at us like, that, well, who are you? Like, why are you saying that? And right. So it consumes you. And then ultimately in really bad situations, you can even get fired from your job because you're not the person that you were hired.
Right.
So,
Right. You've become somebody else. You trying
yeah,
to be something else. And they didn't hire that person. But although the person faking is like, well, that's the person that I had presented to them. So that's the person they thought they hired. So I need to go pretend to be that person.
yes. Well, so you're kind of talking about imposter syndrome there.
A little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so imposter syndrome can be the person who fakes it from the beginning and then has to keep faking it when they've been hired. And that is a recipe for disaster because it just won't last, right? Because you ultimately can't do that forever. The other way that we think of imposter syndrome that's more popular is that we find ourselves in a new situation, like a new job, promotion, you join a new company, and everybody around you is different. There's nobody familiar. And so you think that you are not worthy of the accomplishments you actually earnestly achieved, that somehow you'll be exposed for being a fraud, right? And so then you start to act like the way you think those people perceive you. And then you do that more and more, and you become an imposter. And so the way to deal with that is to realize, like, it's a thing. It affects 70% of all overachievers. So pretty much anybody listening to your podcast. And it affects mostly women and minorities, right? And you just have to recognize that it is indeed a thing. And there are different tools and techniques to deal with it, or shake the little green man off your shoulder.
I want to push a little bit. Maybe you're not going to answer me, but I hope you will. When you look around right now, who are the people and the companies that you suspect are faking it?
Well, I mean, just look around you. Have you watched the news recently?
I was going to get into the news. My next question is about the news. So I was curious your take when I left it open ended.
I mean, look, you can read the news any day of the week and find an example of a CEO or other executive, right, who's fallen from grace because they shoved some truth under the rug. The former CEO of the Boeing Max aircraft disaster, Elizabeth Holmes. I mean, these are all extreme examples, but in everyday life, like the guy who owns the grocery store down the street, like there's examples of this all around us. It's people fake it so much they don't even know that they're faking it.
That was what I was going to say, because I think sometimes people get caught up in something. I'm the CEO of a company. We have a problem, or I made a mistake. If the mistake comes to light, then I'm screwed, right? My career's over. My family is disgraced. We are all disgraced. So the longer I can go and not admit it, not let it come out. Maybe I've hired a PR agency to make sure this doesn't come out and make sure it goes away.
Yeah, that's not.
It's only going to be bad, and I know it's going to be bad. And if I admit it, I don't get anything for admitting it. So in a way, you feel sorry for people like that, because it's like they are kind of stuck. And when this information gets out, they're going to be in big trouble. So all they can do is wait and delay.
I mean, so this is, again, like, it's a trade-off. But wouldn't you rather come forth and be honest about a mistake that you made, right? And have a good crisis plan and talk about, like, here's the mistake that was made. Here's what we're going to do about it. Here are the next steps. Here's how it's going to impact you, right? And to apologize if you have made a mistake, and be honest about it, and then start to rebuild and regroup, rather than being exposed for telling a lie for God knows how many years, right? Where you've ruined your credibility, your employees have lost faith in you, your customers your stock price is going to crater, and you'll probably get fired depending on how bad the situation was. So I think it's always better in a crisis to say, like, okay, here's what happened. And that's why great public relations doesn't help you cover that up. Like, that's such a myth. And actually, the best PR helps you figure out how to truthfully navigate a crisis by being prepared for it in the first place.
And I say it knowing that that's a myth, right? I say it on purpose. And I'm curious, from your career, when you would tell neighbors, friends, family, like, okay, this is what I'm doing, my guess is they had a lot of the myths in their head of what they thought PR was. Oh, you're the spin doctor. You're hiding things.
Yeah.
You're pushing a lot of lies. Like, what were some of the sort of common pet peeves you had about saying to, friends of your kids, right, the other people in the neighborhood, of like, no, this is what we do. This is not what we do.
Oh God, like, I mean, the worst was,
we got all day, so take your time. You can tell me as many stories as you want.
I mean, the worst back then, like in the early 90s, PR was really viewed as a very tactical function of marketing. It was viewed as just publicity and getting ink, and that still clearly has a role in the field, but it is so much more than that now, and it's so much more strategic. Back then, I remember having a conversation Okay, I was 29 years old, right? I remember having a conversation with my neighbor, my parents' friends, and they thought it was sort of like an escort service. I mean, like,
Excuse me? Wait,
yeah,
can you elaborate here?
yeah, like, oh, and it's just those pretty girls in the tight dresses at the auto show. They're the PR girls, like, and I'm thinking like, "Oh my god, this is so not good." Um, but, I
Yeah, it's
think
like why does PR itself as an industry have the worst PR, right? It's sort of
yeah.
ironic, right?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of bad actors out there. We've done ourselves a disservice, and I think there have been many people in the field who played that role of spinning the truth, right, and making the truth something other than what it really was, and making a problem go away, or telling half truths or lying by omission, which is where you're telling the truth but leaving out certain facts. Like that's not good. That's not good anything. That's not good leadership or good communications or good PR or anything. And it will do any company a disservice.
Did you know any people in the industry, companies, clients, personalities, whoever, that did fake it, never got caught, made it through their whole career, was able to retire, get out of the business, whether they were on the tech side or the PR side? Did you ever know anyone who could fake it their way through and they got off scot-free?
No,
No, really.
no.
They all got caught. They all
They
got found out.
all they all either got caught or got sick or couldn't pull it off anymore.
When you mean by couldn't pull it off anymore, it means they just quit, they just left, they gave up?
Like it was just too stressful to keep not doing the right thing,
Right,
right?
right,
Um, and once you start, especially if you're a leader or you're a CEO, like the fish stinks from the head down. So if people watch you, then you're like creating this whole company of fakers, and so they all do it, and everybody's breathing their own exhaust. I do know of one individual who did it for decades, and then just got out of the business entirely because they had a breakdown and lost, spouse, lost other things, and
right.
couldn't do it anymore.
You Speaking of the news, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of things happening politically, right? Whether it's wars in Europe, laws in Florida and different states that come up, and companies are struggling to navigate. They're
Yeah,
struggling to figure out what's the right thing to say, the right thing to do. Things that they've said and done in the past can come back to haunt them. How do they navigate that? What's your advice? If you're still advising, I'm sure you're still advising some of them. What do you say to them? Like, don't do this, do that, when there's no right answer, because there are people on all sides of an issue. You're never going to make everybody happy. No matter what you say, you will get negative pushback as a result.
right. Well, I mean, so that's a given and that's a reality. Um, I think the first thing, well, a couple of things. The first is moving fast. You can't sit on your hands and take months to figure out what your position is on an issue, because in
But
two
does a company need to have a position on all these infinite issues? Because all of a sudden it's like, hey, we didn't have to worry about this a year ago, but now there's all these new issues that we do have to worry about. How do they keep up with this issue is worthy of our time and is worthy of us having an opinion on it? Because you can't have an opinion on every issue.
No, no, you can't. And it's also very distracting, right? It becomes unproductive because your employees are going to be thinking more about how they feel about that rather than actually doing the work, right? I think in this day and age, there's so many issues. There's so many problems that you can take a point of view on. And to answer your question, I think you have to as a leadership team think about again what your core values are and what you stand for and what you don't stand for. And that's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. That is like 24/7. It's something you talk about all the time. It's something that you're very vocal about with your employees so that they know, first of all, that you do have an open mind and that other people's opinions do matter. So when something comes up, you listen to your employees and you listen to your customers and your investors. right? And you have to decide, are you going to take a point of view on this, or are you going to keep an eye on it for a little bit? But you and your leadership team have to be having those conversations anyway. You have to decide, okay, this is how we feel about this, and we can't ignore this because this is important, not because if we don't do this, we're going to lose customers and our employees will hate us. Like, it has to be authentic. And by the same token, like, you can't suddenly decide that you're going to be authentic and that you're going to, let people talk about stuff when you're not really that kind of a person. And there's an example of a company in the New York area that recently did that, and 30% of their employees walked out. Right? You can't just suddenly bait and switch and be like, "Oh yes, we care about all this now," and like it wasn't authentic. And then they went back to being the way they were before, so it was fake.
Right. It was fake, and as a result, they lost a lot of employees in the process. So what did they accomplish in the end? Right? You go one way, you go the other way, you come out behind. That is a good point. What about the idea that companies, they'll lose money on purpose? Hey, we're going to exit a market because we don't agree with what's happening in this market. We don't agree with this rule, this law. We're making a stand, whatever the reason is, but we'll lose money as a result. But now who's getting hurt? Shareholders, investors. There's a whole theory that, like, you're here to serve as shareholders and investors, not to make social ideas public and your political claims. Like, that's not what this is about. How do you help companies navigate that when they are struggling with, we want to do the right thing for the world, but we do have to service the people that have given us their money?
Yeah. Well, I think then you have to ask yourself, what do those shareholders think? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a publicly traded company, you have a number to make. And it also depends upon the industry that you're in. If you're in the business of making HR software, then you probably need to pay more attention to that kind of stuff, right? But or if you're a florist, right. I'm looking at the plants in my window here, right? Then maybe you'll take up those issues, related to climate change, and maybe less so on, other current issues. So you, as you said, you can't take a point of view on every single thing, but you have to.
And I think that's where companies are getting tripped up. I think companies are not looking at some things, and then all of a sudden, that was the thing they should have been looking at. They're scrambling. They don't know what to say. They say the wrong thing, then they undo. They say the opposite, and then it just becomes chaos. And then you're getting a lot of calls, and you're not sleeping.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, you're right.
Headaches. A lot of headaches. You mentioned tech companies. Right now, we're seeing a lot of IPOs are getting delayed. Tech company stocks are crashing. Fed's raising rates. Geopolitical turmoil. Chinese tech companies now. There's a lot of volatility with tech stocks right now. You helped a lot of companies go from private to public, right? You helped a lot of public companies once they were already there. What is the current climate right now for companies that, okay, we want to get our name out there. We got to be sensitive to what's happening. We want to raise money, but it's a little tougher right now. What's the current conversation like?
Yeah, I mean, like, even in the venture capital community of certain sectors, like the cloud index is down by 50% from November. I mean, it's incredible. I think every tech company has to pause for the cause and take a look at what their goals and objectives.
I like it. Pause for the cause. That's a good phrase. I'm going to steal that one.
You can use that. Yeah. You have to take a breather and look at your business plan for the year, right? We haven't been able to do long-term planning in a long time. Like, to really exercise those long-term planning muscles in the last 2 years has really not been possible, because everything was a moving target with COVID. Like, it's one thing this week, it's another thing that week, and everything's changing in between. And so I think the companies would do best to take a look at their original business plan and then work their way back quarter by quarter to say, okay, what are the different contingencies we can plan for? Like, if this happens, we're going to do X. If that happens, we're going to do Y. So that's the first thing. But I also think that companies who are contemplating going public, it is such a difficult time right now. And I almost would say, to wait another the world could change in 3 months, as we know.
We'll all get blown up in 3 months and then
No, don't say that.
won't need an IPO.
No, but like wait another 3 months and see how what the world is doing may change your business.
So that is your advice right now. It's like, you know what? We're at the end of the first quarter right now. Let's just wait till the end of the second quarter. Let's just get to the summer and then figure out.
Let's just see. All right. And especially if you have the ability to have the insight, right, into what's happening and how that may affect shipping or your supply chain still, right? We haven't even really figured out how to rebuild the supply chain yet, right?
We just wait. Everything just gets bottlenecked and we wait.
And then, waiting one quarter. I mean, sometimes a quarter can make all the difference in the world. But given what's going on right now, waiting even 6 weeks, can make a big difference. And if you're a young company seeking funding, I mean, you're holding on sometimes by, a couple payrolls, right, before you get that next round of funding. And especially for early stage companies, this is a very, very difficult time because everybody's taking that wait and see approach. Meanwhile, you need to keep the lights on. So for those companies, it's about throwing enough balls up in the air to see what might stick, getting bridge round financing, going to angel investors, right? Or finding smaller versions of what you offer to bring in a new revenue stream. I mean, that's kind of what it's about for those young companies.
6 weeks is a good point because I think about where we are right now, mid-March. 6 weeks ago, the Olympics hadn't even started yet. So think about how much has changed in the world in the last 6 weeks.
Right.
Yeah. When you saw your experience with different CEOs, you being one of them, was there a personality trait? Was there something that made the best CEOs stand out? Was there something unique about the best CEOs? Because obviously there are founder CEOs. They're the ones that come in. They're the ones that get companies to go, from private to public, or they come in as public. There's variations of where a CEO plays on that spectrum. But was there a personality trait that you always saw, okay, this is the thing that is always why companies are successful because they share something in particular? Or was that not true? Were they all different?
It's a great question. I think that trait changed over the decades.
Really?
Yeah.
Which is weird. So that it tells you then there's not a universal trait. Like, all right, this was good in the 90s, but that trait didn't necessarily serve you post 2000.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there was a time when being brash and confident and loud and funny and popular was the kind of CEO that other executives wanted to be and wanted to emulate. But I think now, that's not the kind of person or leader that a lot of people would look up to anymore or would want to be like, perhaps. I think it's more of that sort of confident, quiet leadership, that humble leader.
It's almost like the move from Steve Jobs to Tim Cook personifies what you're talking about.
I mean, that's a great example. I think humility and yes, empathy is a word that's now being overused, but I think that sort of humble leader who is very honest about what he or she is capable of and knows, and is a person who can say, well, I don't know about that. That's really interesting. Tell me more, rather than being like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do more of that without really even knowing, what it is. So I think that people are looking for leaders that they trust and that they like, right? Those are the two reasons why we do business with people. Do I like you and do I trust you? And trust comes from that sort of place of authenticity and being humble and not coming across like you know everything, because it's not the truth.
You say all that, and I sort of want to get your take on a few names that we all hear. Elon Musk, right? He is the richest guy in the world, depending on the day. The stock's doing amazing. The product is good. People love the product, but the Twitter feed and the commentary, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It feels much more like that brash CEO and not what fits today. I'm assuming you're not involved with Tesla as a PR agent or consultant or advisor or anything. So when you see all this from afar, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes with him and with the company.
Yeah, I mean, so Elon Musk is kind of like a Steve Jobs, right?
Right.
He is his own brand. He's the brand of his company, and you sort of take it or leave it. Like he is all those things that you just said. Um, Maybe with time he will mature and let go of some of that other stuff that makes him so popular, and he will mature and become a different kind of leader. um it's not, he's not everyone's cup of tea, but I will say, he, for the privilege of doing what he has done, what he's doing in space and what he's doing with electric vehicles, I mean, and we don't even know what else he's thinking about, like.
Then there's the tunnels, right? They're doing the boring company,
Yes,
the tunnels.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's no true harm, or um, he may be offensive to some people, but what he's doing is for the betterment of the planet and for many people. You may just not, he may not be your cup of tea, but it seems to be working for him at this time.
Speaking of cup of tea, someone who has another big personality, really used personality in media, was a CEO. Donald Trump became president, right? Not everyone's cup of tea, but certainly
Mhm.
has his fans, has an Elon Musk type of vibe to it. What are your thoughts on how he utilized PR, how he utilized media to get where he got?
I mean, well, of course, he's his own PR
He's a machine.
machine,
And but
right?
he called up himself, right? The stories of he was calling up reporters and saying that he was the PR agent and then giving them the story that he wanted to say. So he was, fighting hand-to-hand combat with PR.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have a political conversation
Right.
about
Not a political conversation, but more of like a media
his
personality
style.
CEO conversation.
Yeah, I mean, he was his own PR machine. He was also his own worst enemy, because many of those strategies um, didn't work, or did work and then were exposed. And yes, he was successful in spite of himself in many cases, right? And the jury's still out on what's going to happen, and if he's going to continue to play his own best self in the next couple of years.
Right. And I'll save you from touchier ones. What about, you look at Jeff Bezos, you look at Amazon, big evolution from where they were in the 90s. I'm sure you were around that ecosystem as you had your firm in the 90s and they were starting up. What have you seen? Obviously, that one of the, again, richest people in the world, biggest companies in the world. He looks very different than he used to look. He looks a lot tougher and stronger than the geeky dorky guy from back then in the 90s. What's been your assessment of that?
So, a quick little story. In the early 90s, there was a conference run by Esther Dyson, who ran PC Forum. And every year she would bring the hottest CEOs of the hottest new companies to Arizona for her annual get together. And the one year I went, we were sitting at this table, and they were like place cards, and this guy named Jeff Bezos was sitting right next to me. And this was when he had just launched Amazon as the first online retailer of books, and everybody thought he was crazy, but it was like the novel idea of the time. So now, like, now look at him now. Yes, he does look a lot tougher and a lot more serious.
People like you thought he was a joke, and now he's like, all right, now look who's boss now. I'll show you what's up.
But like, here's the thing, like, he built a business for the long term.
Right.
And
But they didn't have a profit for a long time. They kept reinvesting the money back into the business.
yeah,
They never paid themselves really.
yes, I mean, he built a business for the long term, and they've had their ups and downs for sure, and he's taken some hits on his personal reputation in the last couple of years, but by and large, that man worked hard to build uh, a good, sustainable business for the long term that changed the way people buy things. Um, he was a phenomenon, and And I would dare say that he wouldn't be where he got to be by, being dishonest or by faking it. Like, he was also honest about the mistakes that he made, and a lot of the things that he tried to do didn't work, and then tried them again later, and they did. It's what you do as a leader to try and grow a business.
I'm curious then. So you were there. He's just some random person at this event. Oh, that's cute, selling books on the internet. When
Yeah.
you thought about, from your point of view, hey, who am I going to pitch? Because I want to do PR for these tech startups.
Mhm.
Were there some that was like the ones that got away, the ones, maybe let's use Amazon as a possible example, ones that you thought, I'm not going to waste my time pitching them. This company's going to be gone in a year, and I need to focus on companies that can actually pay me. They're going to be around. I can grow a business with them. Were there ones where you were surprised by your own assessment of, I thought those guys were going to be great and they disappeared, and vice versa? I should have been trying to pitch Jeff Bezos on PR.
Yeah. I think so. Our particular focus was more on the enterprise B2B side.
True, right. So Amazon's not in that space. So that's a
So
good point.
Amazon, I mean,
Yeah,
we
you were more in PeopleSoft as an example, as the main
yeah, I
early
mean,
one. Yeah.
we could dream about that. And there was a period during the dot-com era where all of our employees wanted to work with those hot, sexy dot-com companies. And but that was a crazy time of irrational exuberance, as Alan Greenspan said. I mean, I think there were more companies that I thought were going to make it that totally flopped, because they had a great idea and they couldn't execute, or they ran out of time and money, and they couldn't get enough money in time to sort of come up with a new pivot or a new strategy. There were definitely companies where we made the mistake and either didn't pitch them right, or blew it because we promised them too much, and we faked it. I wrote about that too in the book, and we couldn't deliver. And those were tough. Those were the toughest losses, when we screwed up.
Whereas when they signed up, they said, okay, we'll take you on, believing that you're going to deliver on what you said. And then it turned out we can't really deliver on what we
Yeah,
said.
I mean, that was a situation where I was under pressure. It was at the end of the recession, and cash was getting tighter, and we had an opportunity to pitch a $500,000, $750,000 deal. And they said, can you do all these things, A through Z? And I was like, you know what? Sure, we can do that.
Sure, whatever you want. Go ahead. Yeah.
We can, you want the Wall Street Journal? No problem.
I'll call them tomorrow. Yeah, I'll call them.
Yeah.
How long does it take before they end up putting in their notice that they're leaving?
We lost pieces of that account within the first 6 weeks, and then lost all of it within, I think, the third or fourth month.
Okay, so it's pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, and so look, like, the lesson is, don't fake it, because the truth will come out, and you'll lose that business or your reputation or your employees or your clients or both or all of them. And then you just lost like 3 months or whatever of momentum that you have to rebuild, and the
Right.
pressure is even greater at that point, you
Right.
know? And we hurt that company because they lost momentum in marketing.
They have to start over with a different
Right,
agency. Yeah.
right. So, that was not good.
And then lastly, before we go, it looks like the pandemic is over, for better or worse, right? Mask mandates going away. JP Morgan's hiring unvaccinated individuals.
Yeah.
People are back in the office. You've been having lunches in person this week, and I have been too. There seems to be this shift that this is happening now. We're here in the spring now. What do you think is going to be permanently different as a result of the pandemic, even though we're going back to normal in terms of tech companies, PR, media relations, all of that? And what do you think will be the things that now we go back to? We revert back to where we were 2 years ago now that we're back to normal. I'm curious what comes back and what doesn't.
I think employee rights are here to stay. Like, the social justice issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion now has a seat at the table that it never had before. And companies have to be aware, have to be conscious, have to take action and be conscious of those issues with their own workforce and with their customers. And if that's the only great thing that comes out of this pandemic, what a great thing to have occurred. And of course, now we have to make sure it stays there. But I think it just just took such a giant leap forward in terms of becoming more of an issue that people are aware with and have to accept. I think in terms of the like where people are working, hybrid work environments, I think are here to stay. Some people will want to continue to work from home, and some people really want to go back to the office. And companies are going to have to figure out how to support both. My personal point of view is that as soon as people start going back to work and start having conversations, there's that FOMO thing where people working at home aren't included, and developing the technology and finding the opportunities to keep them all connected is just going to be too hard to do well. And so I think ultimately more people will end up going back, to their places of work, because they want to be with each other. And, that's where you see and be seen.
FOMO, I think that's a good point. I think if we're all at home, that's fine. If we're all in the office, that's fine. But if all the cool kids are at work and all the not cool kids are at home, that is going to be an interesting dynamic. So that's certainly one to watch. I'm glad you pointed out that in-between thing. What happens with hybrid?
I do think that that for some jobs, continuing to work remotely is a perfectly acceptable and normal thing to do. And touching base with the people that you work with in person once or twice a month may be all that's required. But for the majority of the professions in the world, it's with other people. And so, that's where even young kids, like my kids are in their early 20s, and they love going to the office because they get to like see the people that they work with in person and touch them and go out to drinks with them. And, that's like life is for the living.
Yep. To be in my 20s again, right? That's a different perspective. Sabrina, this has been fantastic. I appreciate you coming on, sharing the stories. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.